are back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. I am Mike Hughes, aka the Shy Kid. You are listening to the Shy Kid podcast, brought to you by iHeartRadio's very own Give Us a Shot network. So make sure you give us a like, give us a follow if you haven't already. It's the only time I'm saying it because we got a special guest today, so we're not trying to do any interruptions. We got the man, the myth, the legend himself. He's sitting on the floor in a random hotel in Texas. Lance Brozdowski. You've seen him on Foul Territory, MLB Network, Marquee Network. Lance, how you feeling, baby?
Doing all right, man. How about you? Yeah, we're on a floor. I was trying to find like a nicer spot, and I just don't know this hotel well enough, unfortunately. So we're on the ground, but hopefully the audio's all right and the video holds up. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And it's completely okay. If we do have a couple buffers, we understand Lance is on the move. So this isn't normally where Lance does operate from when he's giving you his best take.
Exactly.
We're on a whim today. We're on a whim. But man, I kind of want to ask you, first of all, we didn't get a chance to talk before the Ohtani signing last year at winter meetings when we had you on. Back-to-back years, you're seeing a $765 million deal, which could lead up to $800 million for Juan Soto. And then last year you saw a $700 million deal for Shohei Ohtani. So what's the last couple of off seasons looked like for you in winter meetings and just being able to be in those rooms when these things are happening?
It's cool. Yeah, it's definitely cool. I always feel like I traffic in the more nuanced pitching takes and stuff. So it's a little like I think that stuff's cool, but I'm generally not like contributing much to the conversation on like Juan Soto or Ohtani. Like they're unbelievable players. I can maybe play around with some valuation stuff and be like, yeah, it's like that contract's definitely got to pay off in the first couple of years. We'll say first five. You're paying for the 26 to 31 seasons for him, and then you probably hope he just turns into like some OBP style DH and at that point, he's hopefully made up a majority of that contract. But I mean, I think it's good for baseball generally that Cohen has been so aggressive with his money. We've seen this with like the Orioles too, and picking up a new owner in Rubenstein. Like maybe they start spending. Baseball, relative to other of the big four sports, generally has some nice relationship between top dollar spending and success, whereas like football with the hard cap and stuff, it's a little bit weirder of a situation where you have teams like the Chiefs and the Bills, et cetera. But baseball, like the teams that spend are generally good. So I like the fact that like we're seeing those owners agree with that philosophy and hopefully to force other teams to spend. There's teams that are probably just never going to spend, but I think having more teams competitive around high dollar players like this Soto market seemed pretty diverse. At least four teams, I don't know if there was ever greater than a couple percent chance he was going to like the Red Sox, the Dodgers, or elsewhere. But, the Yankees, Mets going toe-to-toe is a ton of fun to see.
For sure, for sure. And then obviously you have a team like the Oakland A's who have basically gone out and say, we're just going to overpay for certain players so that we don't have to spend money elsewhere. So there's definitely levels to it when you're
They have to, or they're going to, Evan Drellick had that point the other day about like some LBPA grievances if they don't spend. So
yeah,
they're just throwing cash around, which is, I guess,
that's
good. I don't know.
Right. It's crazy to think that, though, that like, oh, man, we have to spend money or we're going to get fined. Like you would think like you're an owner of a baseball team.
Yeah.
But, man, to kind of get into it, man, to get some Cubs topics getting in there. Obviously,
sure.
Juan Soto's going to the New York Mets. That's a said done deal. This isn't a Carlos Correa type situation where they're going to be, let down once again. You have a situation right now with both Juan Soto and Anthony Rizzo gone for the Yankees organization. You have a guy like Cody Bellinger potentially available. And now we've talked about it, you and I, before, about how Cody Bellinger has an exit velocity that just continues to dip and dip every single year. If Belly is available and he does potentially end up a New York Met, could you see a resurgence in his numbers, especially from home run production with the short porch in New York?
Yeah, I mean, if he goes to the Yankees, I could definitely see them leaning into some more pull power and picking up the home run total. I'm not thinking he's going to hit like 35 plus, but maybe he creeps back to like the mid-20s, high 20s. The thing that I always struggle with a bit from the Cub perspective with the Bellinger trade is just I think that contract, and everyone has said this, is going to be really hard to trade. And as a result of that, I don't think the prospect capital you get back is going to be great. So in that case, it becomes almost like a pure salary pay cut thing where they just don't want that contract and they just try to get rid of it. And like I struggle with that a bit. Like I understand right now, I believe in markets, they're the leader in the division, projected before whatever signings else happened, maybe with the Brewers or something along those lines. They're probably still in the market for somebody. But I struggle with that idea that the Cubs could be as good of a team that they were last year without Bellinger on the team. Like, despite the fact that the A's velocity numbers are never going to line up, I think there's probably something with him in terms of his ability to just put bat on ball that can trump some of those things such that he just becomes a high average hitter. Like maybe it doesn't project well long term, And he has the leverage point because of this player option over the next 2 years, where it's like, sure, he wouldn't get 27 in open market, so of course he's not going to opt out, regardless of whether he likes Chicago or not. It's just it's crazy. Like he opts out, I don't think he's getting that money. So I struggle. I struggle with the concept of him being moved because I just don't think it is a net benefit to the Cubs aside from purely from a dollar perspective. And if you're a fan rooting for the team, then it's like I don't like it doesn't get me excited to be like we're cutting a guy who's been productive over the last 2 years purely because we just don't want to pay him. It's not like we're
Right.
actually getting a ton of talent back to make us better for 2025. That's the
Right.
biggest hang up for me.
For sure. Now, can I kind of pick your brain on this just to kind of be devil's advocate? Because here's where I'm coming from that perspective. Now, I'm
Yeah.
also not trying to have Tom just hold his wallet in his back pocket and not make a single move. But I think a lot of fans are upset that you're just dumping Bellinger's contract and you're not bringing in another bat to replace him. But I also look at a Mike Olt in 2014 who was a starting third baseman, and we didn't go out and get a third baseman going into the offseason of 2020 or 2015 because you knew Chris Bryant was just chilling in Des Moines, Iowa, waiting for an opportunity. So when you have a guy like Owen Casey, does that at all kind of bring you back down to like a medium level to where it's like, I understand we might just be dumping this contract and there still is no excuse for that, but you might not have to bring in a Juan Soto or somebody of that caliber because Jed does trust the farm system that he does have before him.
I agree with that. The problem I have is just from the perspective of how rough a lot of position playing prospects have
Yeah.
performed when they've come up in the last year or so. You know, like Wyatt Langford off the top was fine. Jackson Holiday
Mm-hmm.
wasn't good. PCA was not good offensively. Like that's the main problem you have is just the gap between AAA and the majors is growing and growing because all the pitchers from the minors were able to ID who are major leaguers based on their stuff, and we can bring them up. Such that now what you're seeing in the minors is just not major league caliber pitching. So it's hard. It's harder for organizations to figure out how to project a minor league hitter at the major league level. You know, some orgs are doing it really well. I think the Orioles do a great job in terms of training swing decisions and getting guys to be major league hitters before they come up. But I think even those guys are going to run into some issues. So tying this back to Casey, I will not be stunned if he comes up and is a below average hitter by a large margin for
Right.
let's say a month and a half, 2 months. Like, of course, there's a chance he pops, but there's going to be a chunk of whatever season he comes up. Say he comes up right off the bat and he's great in April. All of a sudden, like something about his swing works. Maybe he pulls like the guy. There's a guy on the Reds who popped initially. Huge power guy. I forget his name. Reese Hines, maybe that sounds
Mm-hmm.
right. Righty, big bat came up, similar kind of profile, but from the right side, where it was big power, big strikeouts, and he mashed for like 2 weeks and then really struggled. So there's going to be a point in Casey's rookie season where he struggles and summing that back up into like the context of the team, can you weather that as a team and as a lineup? You know, I think they're trying to drive a lot of the lineup through OBP and
Mm-hmm.
on the defensive side, run prevention, whether it be pitching or just pure defense. And I like that as a strategy. Like that's what a lot of smart teams do. I wonder how much you can rely on Casey for the entire season to be like a 20% above average hitter like Michael Bush was. Bush was a
Right.
much older hitter, performed in the minors for an extended period of time, was older, etc. Casey's a younger guy. I love Casey long term, absolutely mashes the ball, but I'm not totally convinced off the bat that he's going to be like a 120 WRC plus guy for the majority of the season, 20% above average. So if you can take a hit offensively, you're confident as a lineup you can take a hit offensively, then I'm not as worried about losing Bellinger. But the pro of Bellinger is that for the entire season, like you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna have some bit of a productive hitter. I'd be really surprised if he falls off hard to the point where he's like basically an average hitter. Like I think he's gonna hang around above average for a bit because of the pure bat to ball side. I just struggle a bit with saying that Casey could slot right in and be as good as Bellinger. He could get there, and I expect him to get there, but I
Yeah.
expect him to do that over a year or two. I don't expect him to do it from the jump. So then you're making the 2025 team worse in a division that I think they should pound and win. And it's like,
Mm.
I don't know whether you're trying to thread the needle too much here, where it's like get rid of some money. We can still win the division with like 86 games if we think the Brewers fall off. It's like, I don't know about that. Like, what if this team wins 83 again? You know, like that would
You
really be
know,
tough. So
you got a lot of jobs that
it's
are in
tough, man.
question at that point. You know what I mean? Like, we're at this point, and I think, I'm not saying you're calling for anybody's head, but if you're going into 2026 without another playoff appearance, I think that's when Jed Hoyer's seat gets a little hotter. And, you've seen it just as well as anybody else. Every single coach or GM's really been getting the boot as of lately in Chicago. So, it's definitely
Jeez.
something that, yeah, I mean, Billy Donovan, shout out to him, man. He's the only guy hanging on. But, You know,
Oh
I
no.
definitely I definitely do think that seat does get a little hotter if, you know, you do just dump Bellinger's contract and you get a couple single A guys or double A guys in exchange. And then the Cubs underperform in 2025, and I'm with it. And I definitely understand, you know, I'm not expecting Owen Casey to be, you know, a Chris Bryant, like I said earlier, but I think it's that understanding of knowing that guys like Nico Horner, guys like Cody Bellinger, where they are very productive, there are guys right behind them that long term might be the answer that are ready now. So I definitely do think you could be a half glass full kind of guy and see it either way, but I'm definitely with you to where it's like the fact that we just can't hold on to both definitely is a question right now, especially for the Cubs organization. But we kind of went into the end of this season wondering if Owen Casey was a trade piece. You know, a lot of people, myself included, would love of Vladdy Guerrero Jr., even though he's going to be a free agent in a couple years. We understand what
Sure.
he was able to do in 2024, but rumors come out today. There's a lot of reports. Both Belly and potentially Seiya Suzuki, if he's to waive off that no trade clause, are available. Lance, I'm not gonna ask you where Seiya Suzuki going, but I will ask: would you say at this point Owen Casey is a long term plan for the Chicago Cubs, and he's likely not going to get moved?
I don't. I listen. I think there's only four untouchables on this team. I think it's PCA, Swanson, Steele, and Shota. Probably. I think that's it. Anything else, I think, is in discussions. This is my basic understanding. I think of what's going on now. I think Casey's in the plans, but if the White Sox come to you and go, Casey's a centerpiece of a Crochet deal,
Mm,
I think that'd be crazy to not consider it. It would probably be in context of other pieces, but like the Cubs, there's like three teams I think that fit with Crochet. I guess you could squeeze the Phillies in there, but they'd be trading like their only two position prospects for him. You know, Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford. I think the Orioles, the Red Sox, and the Cubs are like the clear teams that make a lot of sense for Crochet, just because in a trade you need like some bit of like a matching value, and I think a team like the Cubs, the Red Sox, and the Orioles have some bit of surplus position playing prospects such that it won't hurt as much for the White
mm,
Sox to go, we want three of those guys. Then you go to the Phillies and they're taking all of them. You know, maybe I'm
right.
wrong. Maybe Dombrowski just doesn't care. He's willing to trade prospects, which we've seen. So maybe I'm underestimating that ability. But I think Casey's a long term plan. But again, those are the only four guys that I don't think are being discussed. So I I I can't guarantee you that in 2026 he's on the team.
Yeah,
And if he's not on the team, then it better be like a Crochet coming back. So
for
that's
sure.
kind of how I look at it because I want Crochet. I think Crochet makes a ton of sense for the Cubs. I think he's an unreal pitcher, and I don't even know if I care whether you extend him. I obviously want that, and maybe you're
Right.
willing to give him a little more if your communication with his camp, and it's like, yeah, we'll get you extend him. You know, you buy out these next 2 years of his arbitration, and then you get him for another 2 to 3 after that. He gets him to be in 32, you let him go, et cetera. You get another contract if he wants. But I love Crochet. I love the fit with the Cubs. I'd be bummed if like the Phillies are the team that get him for,
Right.
Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford, and then the Cubs are sitting there with like three other prospects that they could have shipped for him, and they don't. So
Mm.
Crochet's always been my guy. I think he's a great pitcher. Anytime you have a chance to get a top three pitcher in baseball, you got to do it.
No, and I'm so happy you brought it up on your own because that's where we were going in our next conversation. You know, Lance always knows the flow of the show. He knows what's going on. But you know, I see a bunch of tweets today that, you know, the New York Mets, my guy Mike Powers, diehard Mets fan, you know, he's on top of the ceiling right now, just happy as a clam about Juan Soto. But they know they're not done, and Crochet is definitely a potential option for the New York Mets when they have guys like Acuna and they have guys like Drew Gilbert just hanging out, kind of in this purgatory of, you know, not having an everyday starting spot in the majors, but also just raking in AAA. But I see guys like that, and as much as I love Gil, and we've had him on the show before, but when we have guys like Owen Casey and James Triantos, and maybe even throw in, I would hate to throw in, but like a Ben Brown or a Hayden Wesneski, a Jordan Wicks, you can throw in a multitude of guys. I feel like one arm would have to come out for the Cubs. To be able to get a guy like Garrett, one, do you think out of the options available, he is potentially a big part for the Cubs plan? And out of those names we kind of mentioned, you know, the Phillies, the Mets, you know, maybe the Dodgers are in on a guy like Garrett just because they can do whatever they want to do. Where do you think the Cubs stand as it has a return? Do you think they have the potential best option to have the best return for a guy like Garrett?
I think they do, purely from a quantity perspective. But it's
Mm.
also a matter of like I don't really have any great intel on what the White Sox are looking for or who they value specifically.
I would say
Their
anybody,
hitting side
Lance.
has not been particularly good. Yeah, I know. That might be the answer. The problem there is like they don't have, they made. I really like what they did on the pitching side with Brian Bannister bringing him in. I'm more skeptical that like the hitting side was immediately changed because they were like pretty bad on the hitting side. I know they had like a big meeting in the 2023 entering 2024 offseason. They made some minor improvements, like maybe that's on the up and up, but I'm not entirely sure how they're going to eval a guy that they would get back for Crochet
Mm.
and what specifically they're looking for in terms of skill set, you know? So it's like if you want like big power and raw EVs, Casey makes sense. Heston Kierstad from the Orioles makes sense. If you want like versatility, infield guy that'll stick long term, Sean makes some sense. Cam Smith, I think he's too new to the organization for him to trade, for the Cubs to
Mm.
trade. But then you go to the Phillies and it's like Hayden Miller is kind of that type. He's been in the org for a couple years. Data looks good. Third base long term. He fits. They want outfielders. Like the Cubs have a surplus of them. Do they like Kevin Alcantara? Like there's a couple guys in that realm that makes sense. It's really all a matter of like what guy do they like the most? This is again, it's like the matching value thing. It's like Cubs have X value on a guy, White Sox have X plus two. And that's how you get trades done, where it's like you combine an X plus two, White Sox like two guys more than the Cubs like them, and it lines up. And it's like beautiful. This converts, we get Crochet. Cubs get
Right.
Crochet.
For
So
sure.
that's really what it comes down to. I don't really have the best read on like what the White Sox are looking for. It's clear to me they're looking for some kind of bat. They have a ton of pitching. It's like, what do they want characteristically in a bat?
Mm.
Maybe they want a Shaw, and maybe Shaw is the guy that the Cubs have valued higher than the White Sox do,
Yeah.
And he makes a lot of sense on the current fit of the team. So I struggle to see where he's traded. Again, I'm not going to say he's like not in discussions or anything. Like, who knows? Again, like I think those are really the only four guys earlier that I mentioned that are just not on the table for stuff. But yeah, it's tough to read. It's tough. Trade markets, I think, are really hard to gauge, and you don't usually get a lot of information on like who is being targeted until that trade executes, and then you hear the prospects, and then maybe later down the road you hear so and so offered X and Y, they didn't like him, they like this package more, and then we overanalyze on like, man, they missed, they could have gone so and so who's now a top 5 prospect. The guy they got is out of the top 50. So it's, man, the eval side for organizations and teams is always like super hard. And
Sure.
it's tough, man. Like I know a lot of teams using models now and stuff, so they're a little more reliant on the data side, which may be a little bit more predictable. But hitting is still really tough. Hitting in terms of the data intake there, what we have publicly available, and even what some teams have and what they value is, I think, more of an art perhaps than the pitching side, which we're getting to the point where a lot of people are kind of glomming around the same players.
Mm.
So it's a weird spot. Trade markets are fun though, because then we
Yeah.
see like what teams actually value. That was cool when we saw Bush for Ferris and Zahir Hope.
Oh
I
man.
think long term the Cubs might kind of be like, dang, that was tough for us, but Bush looks
Yeah.
great. So it's like you
Yeah.
go to the angle of like, if the Cubs can get in the playoffs and make a run in the next couple of years, that trade was worth it. But if the
For
Cubs
sure.
don't do that, and then you see Ferris manning that rotation, cost controlled for 6 years, and Zahir Hope playing the outfield, you lost that trade. So it's
For
hard in
sure.
the moments, I think, to really come up with the total value on these trades.
Right. Now, when we talk about trading, guys, we look at the Chicago Cubs, and there are several key players that have no trade clauses. And I think that's kind of something I've been very frustrated with, especially in the Jed Hoyer era, is a guy like Seiya Suzuki, who was informed last night, all these reports going on. Jesse Rogers said that Jed Hoyer contacts his agent and says, these are the teams that are interested in you. But Seiya Suzuki, on the other side, not only has the entire leverage in that, also says, I'm not trying to be a DH. We saw it towards the end of last year. PCA, Belly, and Happ were the majority of that outfield. This is a 280 hitter, which, if, in my opinion, if it wasn't for several oblique injuries, definitely was the MVP of the Chicago Cubs' offense throughout the last couple of years. What do you think that does for Seiya's value? Do you think him wanting to be in the outfield definitely does kind of steer off a couple of organizations that might want to make a trade for him?
I wonder whether it's just a leverage thing from Wolf, honestly. Like, I'm not entirely sure my read on that situation right now, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really matter whether he wants to play outfield, does it? Right? Like, it's more of a matter of team fit, and like if they have a better right fielder, then he's just not the right fielder. And if
Right.
he doesn't want to be a DH, like then you just create a weird situation maybe where there's some like, I don't want to say bad blood starts to boil, but you just get
Mm-hmm.
an odd feeling that like, Seiya picked here. I love Seiya. I think he's a great hitter. He's got to be on this team. I think if you're trying to compete in 2025,
Mm-hmm.
again, it's a contract thing. Of like they're really, really motivated to move the contract. Like again, you run into the situation if there's only a few teams. The teams aren't public, but the teams that he wants to go to, for example, if there's only 3 of them, I would imagine they're probably major markets. Maybe they're West Coast because wants to get over to Japan easier or whatever. Like there's a lot of ways that he could have. I have no idea. I'm not going to speculate on like where he'd want to live, but
Right.
say it's only 3 teams. You run into the problem that we run into with like the Bellinger contract of like you're just trading that because the dollars are high and you're not going to get a lot back. I think it's the same situation with Seiya. Like he's a really good hitter, but I don't think you're going to get a lot back if three teams are the only teams you can trade him to. Like, what of
Mhm.
those teams that Seiya came up with actually have an outfield fit need or a DH need or want him in the first place? So it's like you're very limited in your trade partners. So then you run into the situation like, what if it's only one of those teams that fits from an outfield fit perspective and a dollar fit perspective? Like, then that team has all the leverage if the Cubs want to get rid of Seiya in the contract. And like at that point, like, what are you getting back? Like,
Right.
I have no idea. It's not going to be a lot. It's the same situation as Bellinger. So it's just like the assets the Cubs have to trade aren't. I don't think they're. I get how Bellinger could be particularly attractive to other organizations from a fit perspective. But when you
Mhm.
tie in the contract perspective, to me, they're not really that attractive of fits for other teams. They're good
Right.
hitters, but based on the situation the Cubs are in with both these guys and the dollars attached to them and these no trade clauses, et cetera, and the player options, I just almost think you put yourself in a disadvantage to the point again we're getting back to where it's just purely a salary cut, and
For
that's
sure.
just tough to stomach if you're trying to like dominate the division in 2025. And I struggle with it, man. My prediction is neither of these guys get moved. I think they both stay with the Cubs. Just because I think that we'll hear Jed in February be like, yeah, like we tried, the value just wasn't there, and it's like, well, of course the value wasn't there because
Right.
Seiya can only go to two teams. One of those teams had outfielders, didn't want them, and then the other team was like, we're not giving you anything for the player option Bellinger has because we think he's going to fall off the next couple of years. So
Mhm.
take this non-40 man, barely top 100 guy that the Cubs maybe can project on, and it's like that's all you
Right.
got. It's like
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
keep him at that point. Like
It's
stomach
like
the money and keep him. You're a better offense with both those two guys in there. And I struggle to see how you'd be as good of an offense with either of those guys out of the lineup for next year with immediate replacements. Long term, again, the prospects are good enough where I think they can backfill. Like,
right.
but otherwise, I struggle. I struggle, man.
No, for sure. It kind of reminds me, obviously Owen Casey was the biggest gem out of the Yu Darvish deal, but the other three 17-year-old shortstops that you get out of it, it's kind of like, you're looking at that
Yeah,
and you're
those
like, I
guys are
don't,
dust.
you know what I mean? And we thought about it. Maybe Palencia is going to be something. They're not, and that's really what I think you're going to get out of a guy like Cody Bellinger. There's no Jason Dominguez in the conversation. There's not going to be anything of sorts.
No,
It's not feasible and it's just not realistic, especially with Bellinger. You just like you mentioned all the time. Lance on YouTube always killing the game. You talk about the exit
appreciate
velocity
it.
and the
Appreciate
hit.
it.
Oh, come on, yeah, killing it, man. But we kind of talked about Max Fried early in the offseason, and then that got shut down very quickly. But you made a great video on it talking about how the Cubs love, fastballs that cut. They love guys like Shota. They love guys like Justin Steele. Where does that put a guy like Roki Sasaki, who earlier today said maybe a big market isn't the move? Maybe the West Coast, maybe being closer to Japan isn't important. His splitter, you've talked about it nonstop. How important would that be for the Chicago Cubs at this point of what they have going on, especially with guys like Ben Brown and Cade Horton, who where Ben can't stay healthy, Cade's barely even played in AAA. So how much would Roki Sasaki help this organization right now?
I think it'd be huge, and it's a long term play as well as a short term play. I think that honestly think it's less of perhaps a short term play than people think. Like I think, like I'm pretty confident he's not going to be good as Shota in his first year. Um, but the point is that you have the chance for him to be even better over the long term when you have him under cost control. It's one of those things like I can critique him as much as I want on like the fastball shape, the velo dip. Wolf said it was a shoulder problem this most recent season, etc. Was there something wrong mechanically? Did he actually try to take his foot off the gas to preserve the arm? I disagree with that. I just don't think that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
Purely, again, no inside info. It's just my thoughts based on the data I see. So you have all these things that are like in here that you can critique, but it doesn't matter because any team that he wants to go to will say yes because they're just going to drain their international pool to take this guy because it's just such a crazy surplus transaction for any organization that gets him. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it would help the Cubs. I just think it would be more of like a long-term thing. It's like 2026, 2027, like you're looking at super fun upside. Like maybe, he's going to start. If it doesn't work out, he gets broken down or whatever, he turns into a great leverage reliever. But I
Right.
do think like the ability to have this guy under control for really small dollars relative to his potential is an absolute slam dunk for any organization he wants to go to. So
Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't say it's the signing of the offseason. It's perhaps the value of the offseason, though, purely
But
from like
if
what he could create in value versus what you're giving him.
right,
He's like a major league player that you're getting on prospect cost. And that
right.
is unbelievably attractive to a lot of orgs, I bet.
No, for sure, and that's like everything. Like not to just be a biased Cubs fan here, but the one of the best signings of the
Yeah.
offseason last year was Shota Imanaga. $53 million
Heck
instead
yeah.
of Yamamoto for 300. And that's kind of where I want to lead with this next question. We got a couple more before we let you out of here. I know you're on a
Yeah.
time clock. Shota
Good.
Imanaga's success in 2024. How important do you think that'll be for a guy like Roki Sasaki, who's looking at all these different possibilities? You see Yamamoto get 300 mil but struggle, and then you see Shota Imanaga, Mike Imanaga, not only become a fan favorite, but man, he's getting potential Rookie of the Year votes, potential Cy Young votes with the success he was having. Do you think that's important in his decision?
I think it's important. I also point out Yamamoto was pretty good last year. I know he
He
struggled a little
was
bit at
very
the
good.
top,
He
but he
was
still
very good.
three ERA. He did three ERA throughout. And then, like again, that's another one where it's like that was the short term as well as long term for the Dodgers. You
Mhm.
know, Shota, I love like the performance last year he put up was unbelievable. I wonder how much. Again, like I'm sure you talked about this too. Like the park, like Wrigley feels really weird from a pitching
Very.
standpoint this most recent season, and I'm not entirely sure like what the organization thinks of that. My guess is that they think it'll come back to neutral next year, in which case,
Mhm.
like maybe slightly concerned about some regression with Shota. I think that like he gave up a lot of home runs. Those guys who have this tendency to like really carry their fastball tend to do that when they leave pitches middle. And Shota does that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like he's still going to be a good pitcher. He's still going to be above average pitcher. That value on that contract is going to be incredible. That I think might end up being one of the signings of that offseason, especially when you look back in a couple of years. But maybe he's not like a sub 3 ERA guy. Maybe it's more like 3.5, 3.6. And
Sure.
that's still great. And I will take that any day of the week. As to whether like that applies to Sasaki much, I'm not entirely sure. They both still throw splitters. I love their splitters. Sasaki just throws so much harder righty, a little bit different of a profile, less spin capacity. I don't think Sasaki is going to come up with like some nasty sweeper that dominates the league. It's going to be more figuring out the fastball using the split, taking that slider, throwing it harder. So I'm not sure. Like, it's tough to gauge like what exactly he wants. And like Wolf spoke earlier, and you mentioned here in the media room, and I'm not entirely sure like how much he unearthed that was particularly they gave us much signal on where exactly he wants to go, aside from maybe the small market comment that you mentioned and some other things. But I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine it hurts to have Shota and Seiya. That's what
Mhm.
I'll say. Like it's definitely not a disadvantage. It's just I wonder. I don't know what Sasaki wants. I don't know who knows what Sasaki wants. Sasaki probably knows what Sasaki wants. So that's maybe all that matters.
Yeah.
And
For sure.
we'll find out who he ends up going to. But I think there's a chance it's a weird team. I don't know. Maybe he's convinced like the Guardians are good at
Yeah.
like
Oh
pitching
man.
development, and then he goes to the Guardians, and like, sure,
Pissed.
that's fantastic, good for him. Like he'll develop there, be a very good pitcher. He's not.
I'd
I
be
don't think he's
pissed.
going to go to the Rays with that stadium when he realizes he's
Right.
playing in a AAA stadium. But
Right.
maybe there's another team. Like I hate to say it, but like, what if he goes to the Brewers? Like really good rapport. I don't know if he wants to live in Milwaukee in the winter. He probably won't. But
Right.
that's a really good pitching development organization, and like I think they can use him for sure from like an electricity standpoint of just having a really fun arm in that rotation with no more Burns, Woodruff, we'll see what he comes off. I think he's pitching
Mhm.
this most recent season after missing most of last year, all last year.
Mhm.
So I think there's a chance he's go somewhere weird. My bet right now is still probably the Padres or something, but I'm not going to rule out the chance that there's some other random team that we're all just forgetting. And it's like, whoa, he ended up there. That's crazy.
Right. No, yeah, for sure. If I hear he goes to the San Francisco Giants, I'll lose my top, Lance. I ain't gonna lie to you.
Yeah, the
But
Giants, like, who knows, man? West
I'd lose,
Coast and
I'd lose it. I'd
I don't
lose it.
know. I don't know, man.
But keeping it on the West Coast, Nico Horner, a guy we kind of avoided in the beginning of this conversation, just because we kind of tried to get through the outfielders first. Nico and Seattle kind of feels like a done deal because the last couple of off seasons they've been monitoring his situation, and it's felt like they're always kind of just peeking their head in to see if he's available. Shot or no shot, Nico Horner is not on the Cubs 2025 opening day roster. Now, obviously, he's got an injury as well. He might not start the beginning
Yeah.
of the season, but do you expect him to be moved?
I think the answer is yes, but I honestly feel like we're getting to the point where it's so obvious that I'm not entirely sure if it's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like we've heard this so much, and it's just I wonder again whether the value matches up. My understanding is a lot of the price tag on all those Mariners pitchers are insane,
Mhm.
and my prediction is none of them get moved, and the Mariners just enter the season with their rotation. If anybody gets moved, it's probably going to be like a reliever or maybe like an Emerson Hancock or somebody who's like not exactly a fixture of that rotation.
Right.
Or like say they get Sasaki and then Hancock gets squeezed out and then he ends up somewhere. But like, I don't think it comes to take Hancock for Horner.
Right.
That'd be kind of wild to me.
Right. You think
Or
you
is
think
there a prospect?
Brian Woo's not in the
Yeah.
conversation like it's been?
Listen, I think that again, like we're in this weird space in the offseason where like I imagine his name has been brought up by
Yeah.
a lot of organizations. So like if one person reports it as like they come talk to the Mariners about Brian Wu, it's like, sure, that's probably correct because I'm sure they've had calls and discussed general ideas, you know? So a lot of these things that are just very obvious to me are always funny when they're like reported as facts. And
Mm,
it's like, well, yeah, that's makes sense. He probably talked to Depoto at some point in the last month. And I imagine the name Wu came up. But like again, my understanding is like they want a lot for those pitchers. We're seeing what guys are getting in the open market. Like Blake Snell getting 34, Montas 17. You
mm,
know, Evaldi's going to get over 20 a year. I maybe it's over 22 a year. Maybe it's more than Kikuchi. He's 34, 35. You know, like it's not surprising that the Mariners would look at the market at present and go, like you want one of these guys under cost control that we think is good. Like good luck. Like that's Crochet. Like
right.
Wu is probably going to return what Crochet returns, just
Mm,
from a pure value perspective. Like Crochet, yeah, for 2 years that he's a top five pitcher in baseball.
right.
Wu is maybe a top 30, 40 pitcher in baseball, we'll say,
Mm,
give or take, with some great upside. I love him. But like he's got what his Blue has like 5 years of control. Like,
yeah.
yeah, that's gonna you might have to pay more for him than Crochet. The Cub are the Cubs gonna do that? I don't know.
Right. For
And
sure.
I struggle with like seeing a package come together for any of those Mariners pitchers because of that. And
Without
as
a
a
doubt.
byproduct of that, getting back to Horner, like I just don't know what the return is. Like they're not going to probably get any of those top five pitchers. So do they take Hancock? Do they take Hancock plus reliever plus prospect?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like then
Nah.
that turns into the question of like Shaw. Like how much you trust Shaw? This point I'm talking about, like all these guys coming up and struggling. Like, is
Yeah.
there something about Shaw that the Cubs see that's like we don't actually think he'll be that much of a liability
Mm,
offensively off the bat? And then
no,
maybe you're more confident in trading the Horner. But
for
my
sure.
prediction to get back to it is probably that he's on the team. And maybe I'm being weird here. I feel like I'm keeping everybody on
Dude,
the Cubs,
Lance, dude,
but
don't even
I
worry
don't
about
know.
it.
I don't know. That's just my
But
gut. I still think there's a
that's
trade, but I just don't know what the trade is. To me, it's more prospects for a major league piece.
exactly.
Um,
I
that's
think
really
that's
what I think it
important.
is.
Like for you, not to cut you off, but I think it's so important with what you're saying because I don't want you to think like, oh man, I'm just gatekeeping right now. I just don't think anything's happening. Like
No.
these are guys that should be on this team. Like if you would have told me 2 years ago or even a year ago today that Nico Horner wouldn't be on the 2025 Cubs, this is a
Yeah,
280
it's a
hitter,
surprising one, right? Yeah.
like a Gold
You'd be like,
Glover.
whoa.
Like this is not a Hall of Famer, but a Cubs legend for sure. If he continues at the level that he's playing, everybody loves a little Nico Suave in their life, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I definitely am with you on that regard. But the last question I have for you, and I'm not trying to get you in trouble by any means, but I do think it's important for the fans to kind of hear your perspective on it. I grew up here, man. I grew up, 4
Heck yeah.
miles away from Wrigley Field. Wrigleyville was so important to my childhood, and it feels like Disney World. It feels like Wrigleyville's become Disney World, Wrigley World, really, if you think about it. And there's a casino, there's a hotel, there's the Marquee Network, which is great. Check out Lance on the Marquee Network. But in all seriousness, man, when are the Cubs gonna start being the Cubs again? I see them trying to build around the stadium, but really with the ballpark. You see that after the Juan Soto deal, they show the top 12 contracts in Major League Baseball history. The Chicago Cubs are nowhere to be found. Still with that Jason Hayward deal sitting at number one. Jed Hoyer goes out and says, we could have got a guy like Juan. We're not afraid to get a guy like Juan, but we just weren't interested. Said the same thing about Shohei. And I'm not even going to put this on Jed, Lance. I saw Theo Epstein do the same thing with Mike Trout, Manny Machado, and Bryce Harper. Who is that guy that the Cubs would be willing to spend $300 million on? Not actually, but you know what I mean? Like, do
It's a
you
great point. Rhetorical, yeah.
do you ever see them seeing that guy? Because we've seen some of the best hitters of all of baseball come through free agency the last several years, and the Cubs weren't realistically in on any of them. So do you think that's an ownership thing, or do you think Jed and Theo just didn't see that guy fitting in Chicago?
I honestly have no idea.
Yeah.
I think at some point this team has to spend on a big dollar free agent. And I'm not entirely sure who that is. I'm not actually sure what the next free agent class looks like and whether there's a piece maybe they're interested in. Is it not good? Yeah.
It's
Okay. So
not
then
that
like
great.
so maybe you're looking at 2027, and then like okay, now we're talking about this for another 2 years.
Hmm.
I think it's tough. I think it's tough, particularly because it would have been nice to have him maybe more involved with Otani, and it would have been great to see them more involved with Soto. Just from a signaling standpoint of like, we want our team to be demonstrably better, and here's how you do it.
Hmm.
I wonder whether, the Cubs are a very model driven team, and models generally don't like these contracts. Like they're not going to love them. You could project them out. You're really going to have to play with like what you want to pay on a dollar per war basis, wins above replacement. Like what's your value
Yeah.
proposition to get these deals done? And that's probably what the Mets did, right? Like most of the time, we think it's about $10 million for one win, one war, so to speak. Like maybe that has changed post COVID and now it's 11 to 12, in which case you could justify the Juan Soto contract. You
Mhm.
know, you could even say the Adams contracts is like kind of in par. But if you think it's like 9 to 10 still, where maybe some teams are still operating, then you think all these contracts are overpays. You think the Adams is an overpay. You think a lot of these, everything's an overpay. And the Cubs' approach for the last couple of years has been to acquire a bunch of players who are potential values, right? Like I think Boyd will produce over his value of his contract. Shota's going to produce over the value of his contract. Seiya, for the most part, is probably going to produce over the value of his contract. A lot of these guys are doing that. Like Swanson, because of his defensive floor, I think will end up producing over the value of his contract in the life of it, you know? And that is how they operate. And you can justify that when you have like the numbers to back it up and you can tie all these things back to like the dollar per war standpoint. You can justify spending close to 200 million on a Swanson or something along those lines because of defensive projection, all these other things, run prevention, et cetera. But it becomes really hard to justify the Soto contract, especially the end years of that Soto contract. You need like is Cohen to step in and go, listen, like I appreciate how we're thinking about this contract, but I don't care. Here's the money. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's how you get to these big dollar contracts. And we see some other GMs operate in that manner. And like that is a tough balance, I think, to strike. I wonder, you know, I'm not sure what it's ownership. I'm not sure what it is. It's just I think the Cubs are model driven and models generally don't justify these big contracts.
Right.
And it's long term commitments on guys that you're not entirely sure they're going to project. Most of the time, they end up failing as contracts. Like, we're not going to look at the Soto contract in when he's 35 and be like, wow, what a great contract. You
Yeah.
know, maybe we look at it like wow, that was a good contract. It's now a terrible contract.
Right.
And that's okay because if the Mets win a World Series, nothing matters, you
Man,
know?
just
So
one.
it's like,
All it takes
that's
is
the
one.
thing. Exactly. It's like fly forever. It's like you can get to that threshold and get over and get a World Series, then like none of this matters.
Right.
So it's a matter of like how tolerant you are to like take a potential to deviate from the model slightly and be like, okay, we get this is gonna kill us in 5 years, but we really think this guy we got to overpay for the next 3, and that opens up our window a ton. I just think the Cubs have operated as if that doesn't really matter and that you could do it off constructing high OBP run prevention lineups. And I
Right.
agree. Like honestly, from the data perspective, I kind of get it. You know, like that's a efficient way to build a ball club to get to like 83 to 92 wins a year. I don't think it's an efficient way to get to 100 wins a year, which is where some of these other teams are shooting for. And that's how you get in the playoffs every single year and make title contentions. Because if you're a 100-win team and 98-win team, you know, your bottom is maybe 88 and then you still get in. The problem is like when you build these like 88-win teams, your bottom's 78. And then you run into like some 83-win seasons all the time and you're not in the playoffs. You know, your ceiling's 98, sure. But like that 20 win range, my angle is like just move that up. Like take a couple big guys, diversify your bullpen like the Dodgers have, pay for a stud or two, and the next thing you know, boom. Like your bad team, your team that underperforms in a given year is winning 88 games a year and you're still in the playoffs. Like that is the ultimate, like that is it. Like that is what every Cub fan I understand wants.
No,
I just
for
don't
sure.
think they're there yet. And I don't know how they get there, aside from just being okay with tolerating a potential bad contract down the road. And I don't know what to tell you. Like I'm not in those rooms. I think very few people actually have ever been in those rooms or
Lance,
actually
get in
understand
those
how that
rooms,
thought
bro.
process. I don't understand how this like how those thought processes work. You know, it's fascinating to think about. I just think it's like one or two decision makers. Are we comfortable spending $51 million on a guy at age 36? If the answer is no, then you're never getting to the Soto money. If the answer is I don't care, I want to win in the next 5 years, then you get to the Soto money because you understand that you have to take the hit down the road. You know,
No, for sure.
long-winded answer. It probably doesn't give much insight, but
It's an answer though. You know what I mean? Like I know we're
yeah,
all kind of thinking similar to the same thing, and I've always kind of felt like once we got 2016, I felt like not saying they do this, but it feels like the Ricketts are like, hey man, no matter what, on any given Friday at 120, 40,000 people are going to be in these seats. So it definitely does feel that way, where it's like they really don't need to sell seats
yeah.
right now. You don't need a Shohei Ohtani where they're going to sell seats no matter what. I've told you millions of times. My dad, diehard Cubs fan, passed away in 2015. Like 2016 is everything, and it'll always be everything forever. And so many other people have stories like that. So the
Yep.
fan base is always going to be there. That's really where I'm at with it. But always thinking in the back of my mind, like what would a Bryce Harper have looked like for the Chicago Cubs offense of 2019, 2020?
Yeah, man.
How does that change? Even a Juan Soto where, yeah, man, we got Belly kind of on a decline and all these, but boom, insert him in the 2025 Cubs roster. That lineup looks a lot different. That lineup
Oh
looks a
yeah,
little
I mean, come on.
scary. Like, you're pitching around Soto now. Now guys like Seiya are eating. Now guys like Nico are at the top of the lineup again. So, but Lance, man, we appreciate you being here. I can't wait to see your insight on Matthew Boyd because I'm still teetering with that. That's why we didn't
Yeah, yeah,
talk
we'll
about
see.
it today.
It's
But
good value, but it's not going to change the
sure,
anything. You know what I
sure.
mean?
I
It is what it
I
is.
I want to do
He's a good
a.
dude too. So
I'll leave you with this. I just kind of wanted to float it in there for you, just put it in the bank.
yeah, let me hear it.
Tyler Chatwood 2.0 is all I'm saying. It's just where I'm at with
Chapman
it.
was pretty good for a year, right?
That's what I'm saying. You know what I
Okay,
mean? Like
okay, I'll take
it's
that. I'll take that.
look back on it, be like 38 mil over 3, but then like in moments, I saw him hit a triple once at Wrigley. Pretty cool.
There you go. There you go. That's cool.
Highlight of his career. But no, man, we appreciate you being here. Make sure you check him out. You can see him, Foul Territory, MLB Network, Marquee Network, everywhere around the sun. Lance Brozdowski's there. But if you just want to see him and his takes and I mean, things I can't even break down to you because the way this man talks about pitching arsenals of what some of these guys have. You can check him out on his YouTube channel at Lance Brozdowski. Until then, man, I am Mike Hughes, aka the Shy Kid. Until then, thanks for watching. Peace.